Tell you what, guys, there's nothing like the presence of God. His presence, it's not a feeling, it's a knowing. It's not goosebumps, it's faith. It's having faith that He's always with us. That's His presence. Being aware of His presence is something totally different. That's what I'm after. In this book here, Practicing His Presence by Brother Lawrence and Frank Laubach. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I'm not really sure. But I'm about halfway through this book. It's a short read. A little bit over 100 pages. And it's amazing. So part of it is Brother Lawrence, and the other part is Frank. So I'd like to go through it. I've got a bunch of stuff highlighted, but this book carries the testimony of two men's unique relationship with God, walking in the awareness of the presence of Christ, just as Christ walked about on earth, constantly aware of His Father. Is such a relationship obtainable? Is it desirable? Is this experience central in the Christian life? The idea of living in the constant awareness of Christ has seemed so far-fetched that it has been generally discarded as hopelessly unattainable. It really isn't. But if it is obtainable, why then has such a relationship to the Lord rarely been found among Christians during the last 2,000 years? The answer to that is very simple. Coming into a deep, constant awareness of Christ is a revelation unknown to most Christians. You do not seek after something that you do not know even exists. Secondly, practicing a constant fellowship with Christ has rarely been experienced by any but a few men, isolated from others who shared such an experience. So what has been missing? A corporate endeavor, a group of men and women together seeking to know nothing but Christ. This is what has been missing. This, the corporate venture, is what makes the difference. This is what takes away the difficulty. To put it more practically, when a group of people, standing together with one another, seek to live constantly in fellowship with Christ, suddenly the impossible is very obtainable. This book was originally put together for just such a group of people. It was prepared for about 120 people who wanted to experience together what Brother Lawrence and Frank Laubach knew individually. The book is passed on to you with this word. The message of this book is for people in a practical experience of the church, the body of Christ. This wonderful relationship to Christ was never intended for the individual to seek alone, nor to find alone. This relationship is for the church. But when I say church, I speak of those few people who have had the privilege of living in the atmosphere of something called church life. You may wish to read the story of the early church to better appreciate what was lived out in the lives of first century believers. It is our goal to see that same experience known again corporately by the believers of our own day. There are two men in church history who have written very practically and simply on the subject of the practice of the presence of Christ. Both have a strong testimony to the reality of walking almost continually in the awareness of the presence of Christ. In our quest to know the Lord as well as He knows us, we can wisely turn to the experience of these two men. One of these men lived in the 17th century, the other in the 20th. The first of these two men is Brother Lawrence, Nicholas Herman of France, who died in February of 1691. The second is Frank Laubach, who went to be with the Lord in June 1970. This book combines under one cover all that we have of Brother Lawrence's words on the subject of living in the presence of the Lord, and it also includes a condensation of two works by Frank Laubach on the same subject. Frank Laubach's words are drawn from two small booklets, Letters by a Modern Mystic and Games Within Minutes. We have very purposefully updated and rewritten the words of Brother Lawrence. The words of Frank Laubach have undergone only the slightest alterations. So it goes on to tell about the lives of Brother Lawrence and Frank. I'm going to skip some of this over here. Little is known of Brother Lawrence. We will tell you what we know. He was born Nicholas Herman in French Lorraine in 1611. Born into poverty at age 18, he was converted to Christ. He later became a soldier and then a footman, a servant who opens the carriage door, waits on tables, etc. Still later, in 1666, at the age of about 55, he entered a religious community called the Carmelites, located in Paris. He became a lay brother among these barefooted devotees to Christ. It was among them he took the name Brother Lawrence. He spent 25 years in this community, dying there at the age of 80 in 1691. During those years, he served mostly in the hospital kitchen. He became known within the community and later beyond it for his quiet and serene faith and for his simple experience of the presence of God. Eventually, Brother Lawrence even received inquiries from people in other parts of France concerning how to have a similar reality in their own daily experience with Christ. Even church leaders sought him out for counsel and help. Little is left to us of what he said. We have a few brief letters by him, plus 4 recollections called Conversations, written by other people who recalled for us what he had said to them. In 1692, a year after Brother Lawrence died, some of his letters were published. We decided to include in this book the preface to that first edition, set in order by M. Beaufort, Grand Vicar to M. D. Chalons, who recommended that these letters be published. This preface, now nearly 300 years old, still reflects the simplicity of the man and the esteem with which some held him. Death has carried off many of the brothers of the Order of the Carmelites, Duchesses, in the last year. They died in the rare legacies of lives lived in virtue. Providence, it seems, has turned the eyes of men chiefly to the passing of Brother Lawrence. Several people have seen a copy of one of Brother Lawrence's letters and have wished to see more. In order to meet this request, care has been taken to collect as many letters as possible which Brother Lawrence wrote with his own hand. Every Christian will find much of these writings to edify him. Those in the thick of the world will learn from these letters how much they have deceived themselves, looking for peace and joy in the false glittering of things that can be seen, yet which are so temporary. And those who are seeking the highest good will gain strength from this book to preserve in the practice of virtue. All readers, whatever your occupation, will find profit in this book, for in it you will meet a brother busy as you are in outwardly activity, but a brother who, in the middle of all his demanding tasks, had learned how to wed contemplation to activity. For the past 40 years, our brother has hardly ever turned from the presence of God. During the nearly 300 years since these letters were first published, there have been unknown thousands, perhaps millions of copies of them printed. Now they come to you in modern language with the hope that the message that he so beautifully dealt with has only begun to be known. Now the life of Frank Laubach. He was born in the United States on September 2nd, 1884, almost 200 years after the death of Brother Lawrence. 45 years later, Frank Laubach was serving as a missionary in the Philippines, though he had done many commendable things by the time he was 45 years of age, including a truly remarkable and faithful ministry among the Muslims in the southern Philippines. We would still have to confess he was a relatively obscure soldier of the cross. It was at this time, at 45 years of age, that Frank Laubach began the practice of abiding in the presence of Christ. It is so interesting to realize that 40 years later, when Frank Laubach took what was for him a very short step out of time into eternity, he died at the age of 85, one of the most widely known and best-loved men of the 20th century. To try to tell who Frank Laubach was, or even to give a sketch of his life in a short space, is simply impossible. From Signal Hill in the Philippines until his death at the age of 85 on June 11, 1970, he lived one of the fullest lives ever by one of Christ's followers. He was one of the most traveled Christians of all ages, perhaps the most traveled man of modern times. He was known in virtually every land on earth. Countless honors were bestowed on him, though when once presented with a famous Man of the Year award, he said humbly, "The Lord will not wish to count my trophies, but my scars." He wrote over 15 books, several of them bestsellers that had a worldwide influence. He was perhaps the greatest single educator of modern times. He has been referred to by many people as one of the most unique figures of this century. The accomplishments of his life are virtually endless. Nonetheless, the wellsprings of this incredible man's life can be traced back to that lovely, lonely little hill behind the shack where he lived on the island of Mindanao. Frank Laubach wrote down his experiences during these days in a series of letters to his father, from which we have gleaned these writings. We sincerely hope that the words of Frank Laubach recorded here will become ageless, and we prayerfully hope that these words will endure as long as there are Christians left upon this earth to read them. Lord, make us one of the few men who earnestly pursue you. These are different letters he wrote to his father. January 26th, January 20th, January 29th, March 1st. So in the next video, we'll read some of these. It's just amazing the wisdom and simplicity that's in here. And yeah, so sorry for the long video, but this is good stuff.